Hello again and welcome to another Warlord Wednesday, the episode of the week where we talk about all things bolt action. Today we will be continuing our unit review series, this time taking a look at the German Panzer III. This small yet mighty battle tank was the mainstay of the German Panzer forces throughout much of World War II, and it is also a favourite of German bolt action players as well. And so, without further ado, let's take a look at what makes this tank so popular and dive right into today's episode. Now, let's begin with our unit overview. This is actually a little tricky with the Panzer III because there were so many variants. It was constantly updated throughout the war, and this is reflected in the bolt action tabletop game. In the Armies of Germany book, there are over 3 pages of variants for the different Panzer IIIs that you can field in your army. So what we're going to do is cover some very general points about the unit first, and then we're going to individually go through the different makes and models, highlighting the differences and pointing out their strengths and weaknesses. This might seem kind of obvious, but the first common trait shared among all Panzer IIIs is they are armoured vehicles. Starting off in the early war, you have a bunch of light tanks with a damage value of 8+, and as we get into the later war, as models start getting upgraded and up-armoured, you find them getting a 9+ value, making them into proper medium tanks. Regardless of whether you take your Panzer as a light one or a medium tank, you do count as being a tank. This means that you can tank shock people with any Panzer III you take in your force. As with most tanks in bolt action, the Panzer III comes as a single model squad. You get that one Panzer III in the unit, and it will take up the tank slot in a reinforced platoon. Small side note here, many 40k players when they come into bolt action assume that by taking a cheaper tank they'll be able to fit more of them into an army. That's generally not the case. Most games of bolt action are limited to a single platoon, and therefore you're limited to one tank slot. That doesn't mean you should just take the biggest and baddest tank. Sure, a Tiger 1 is going to be more impressive than a Panzer III, but that Tiger 1 is going to take up potentially half of the points in your army, whereas the Panzer III is going to take up a lot less, and therefore you'll be able to fit more stuff in. It's about picking the right tank for what you want to get out of your list. But refocusing on the Panzer III, they do share one last common trait. Whether you're looking at an early war variant or mid-war, they're all geared towards tank versus tank combat. In fact, out of the 7 or 8 Panzer IIIs we're going to be looking at today, 6 of them come with anti-tank guns. That's not to say the Panzer III can't engage in anti-infantry duties. It comes festooned with medium machine guns, all benefiting from the Hitler's buzzsaw special rule, giving them an extra shot. And there are a couple of variants that are much more geared towards anti-tank, with things like light howitzers and even flamethrowers. But these are exceptions that prove the rule, and broadly speaking, when considering a Panzer III for your force, you need to understand that its principal role will be knocking out enemy vehicles. But that covers the big overview of the Panzer III. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty detail. Let's take a look at all the different variants, their pros and their cons. First up, we have the Panzer IIIC and Panzer IIID. Both of these vehicles saw their principal service in 1939, making it a very early war tank. Basically, if you're doing some recreations of the Battle of Poland, the Panzer IIIC and D are the ones you want to go for. To represent the early war nature of this vehicle and the fact that not many soldiers were experienced at this point, you can only take the C and D as either inexperienced for 108 points or regular for 135 points. You cannot take this as a veteran tank. It comes with one turret-mounted light anti-tank gun with a coaxial MMG and one forward-facing hull-mounted MMG. It's also a light tank, which means it has a damage value of 8+. At the end of the day, this is a light tank with a light anti-tank gun. It is designed for peer-to-peer combat. It wants to be engaging other light vehicles or tankettes. Anything heavier than this, including medium tanks, such as the French like to use at the beginning of the war, might be a bit of a struggle for your Panzer III to engage directly. But remember, many of those early mediums come with the one-man turret rule, making them a bit less reliable and also much less maneuverable. If engaging a medium tank with an early war Panzer, the best thing you can do is try and take advantage of your maneuverability to get flank shots on it. This will get you an extra point of penetration and will allow you to begin evening out the fight. But it's not just enemy armor you need to be worried about. Whilst you're focused on that, you could get hit by some infantry-based AT. For example, you've got the AT rifle. Now, against your front armor in half range, an AT rifle might glance you on a 6. So it's not a huge threat. But if you start trying to take your early war Panzer into a mid-war or late war fight, when things like bazookas start turning up, very quickly you're going to find it getting annihilated. And let's not forget, even in the early war, most factions have access to infantry-based medium anti-tank gun teams. And in my opinion, it's these which represent the greatest threat to your early Panzer III. Because in tank versus tank duels, both sides are just slinging light AT guns at each other. And we've seen that the AT rifle is a bit meh. But a medium anti-tank gun team will outrange you. It will out half range you, meaning it will less likely suffer from that -1 to hit from long range. And when it is within half range, it's going to get a penetrating hit against your vehicle on a 4+. Most vehicles can take glancing hits day in, day out. I mean, unless your opponent rolls a 6 and then you fail a leadership test, your vehicle's not going to be destroyed. But penetrating hits are almost a guaranteed death sentence. On a 4, 5, or 6, your vehicle just gets destroyed. On a 3, your vehicle is set on fire. And then you need to take a leadership test, and if you fail, your vehicle is destroyed. On a 2, your vehicle is immobilized, but if you're already immobilized, your vehicle gets knocked out. So 5 out of 6 results on the vehicle penetration table have a chance of destroying your vehicle. Taking that into account, the biggest lesson you can learn from using your early war Panzers is to make sure you avoid medium anti-tank guns like the plague. Focus on going after the targets your tank wants to kill, enemy vehicles, and hosing down exposed infantry squads with those medium machine guns. The next marker Panzer we're going to look at is the E and F. This is essentially exactly the same as the C and D. It's a light tank with a light anti-tank gun, 2 machine guns, but its principal service was between 1940 and 1942. So you can use this for a huge part of the war, the fall of France, and even the beginning of Operation Barbarossa. It was a relatively common variant as well, with 535 being produced, but on the tabletop, all of this translates to one important difference. You can take this not only as inexperienced and regular, but also as veteran. But apart from that, all of the points costs, the pros, the cons, the way to use the tank that we talked about with the C and D apply here with the E and F as well. It's not until we get to the Panzer III G that we start seeing a really significant difference. The G remains as a light tank, so make sure you're avoiding that medium AT, and it also comes with those 2 medium machine guns, great for hosing down infantry. The big difference, though, is it comes with a turret medium anti-tank gun. This is huge because it means you can finally start engaging those enemy medium tanks on an equal footing and maybe even actually start getting an advantage over them. By having a medium anti-tank gun, it means you can finally start engaging those enemy vehicles in a straight up fight. If you're not able to maneuver and get on the flank, it's not such a big deal. Also, you're no longer being outranged, so you're not desperately trying to get close to the enemy to avoid a -1 to hit penalty. On top of this, if you're using the Panzer III G in the appropriate time period between 1941 and 1942, you'll find that a lot of the enemy tanks you're going up against are still medium tanks, but they've only got those light anti-tank guns. For example, the Matilda II in the Western Desert. This turns the tables and completely upends the equation, because now you have the range advantage. So you can sit back and shoot at them, and they have to physically move to get into range. And you also have the half range advantage as well. So whilst you might be hitting them just at a straight up 3+, maybe a 4+, thanks to some soft cover, the enemy vehicle is going to continue to have to move towards you, suffering another -1 hit penalty, and there could be soft cover, and they also could be firing at long range. I have been in many scenarios where my Panzer 3G has been slinging rounds into enemy tanks hitting on a 4+, and their return fire has been hitting me on a 6. There are many veteran bolt action German players who swear by the Panzer 3G and say it is the best variant by far. And the big reason for this is its points costs. You see, because you're still a light tank, this vehicle is incredibly cost effective. At inexperienced, it's only 124 points, but at regular, where you're more likely to take it, it's only 155 points. You get all of the advantages of having a medium anti-tank gun, but you only have to spend 20 points more over the early war variants. And in comparison to some of the later Panzer 3s we're going to be taking a look at, this is a noticeable discount, with the Panzer 3G being 45 or 50 points cheaper than its nearest late war counterpart. And those late war tanks aren't bringing any more damage output. They're still rocking medium AT guns, but they're just paying a lot more for that increased durability. But if you're a savvy German commander, you're making use of your cover and your range advantage, you might be paying for medium armor that you rarely feel the advantage of. But speaking of medium Panzer 3s, we get on to the Mark H and J. This was the most common Panzer III produced by the Germans, with over 3,000 of them being made, and them seeing their principal service between 1941 and 1943, right at the height of the fighting on the Eastern Front. At inexperienced, it will cost you 160 points, regular 200 points, and veteran will cost a whopping 240 points. This is the most expensive variant of the Panzer III that you can take in bolt action. As with all Panzer IIIs, this thing comes with 2 medium machine guns, and as with the G, it's also rocking that mighty medium AT gun, allowing it to engage most vehicles and infantry targets, giving it a huge amount of tactical flexibility. The big difference, though, over previous marks is this is the first Panzer III that we've seen that is a full-blown medium tank with a damage value of 9+. This does give you a noticeable increase in durability. When facing off against light anti-tank guns, if they are shooting at you from long range, which they should be because you now have the range advantage, they're only going to glance you on a 6, and they can't actually penetrate you until you get into half range. On top of this, I know we dismissed the AT rifle earlier, but considering this tank likes to be seen on the Eastern Front, and the Russians love to spam AT rifle because they can take 3 of them, whereas everyone else can only take 1, the Panzer H and J is essentially immune to anti-tank rifle fire. Even if the enemy is within half range, if they're shooting at your front armor, they cannot physically penetrate it. What's really cool is the H and J also come with an extra special rule called reinforced armor, which means that any hits against their rear armor are actually treated as hits against their side armor. So instead of getting +2 to hit for shooting the Panzer III in the bum, you only get +1. It's a pretty niche rule, and it rarely comes up, but it is there for when things have gone a bit squiffy. Now, I know I said earlier that a lot of veteran players don't like the H and J because they feel like they're paying points for armor that ideally they're not going to use, but war is unpredictable, and tabletop war is no exception. Sure, in an ideal circumstance, your Panzer III will receive little incoming fire, but what if the enemy outflanks you, or what if you make a mistake? Having a light Panzer means that you're going to be punished for that mistake severely. Having a medium Panzer III means that if things do go wrong, you've got a greater chance of surviving and not taking a pretty crippling blow when your main piece of armor gets taken out. I see it as the beginner-friendly Panzer III. Next up, we have the L&M. The principal service for this tank is 1942 to 1943, and it's a pretty common variant with 900 of them being made. The L&M is almost identical to the previous Panzer we just looked at, the H&J. It's a medium tank with a medium anti-tank gun. It comes with 2 medium machine guns as well. There are only 3 key differences you need to be aware of. Firstly, the L&M does not have the reinforced rear armor special rule. Secondly, it is slightly cheaper because of this, about 5 or 6 points. And lastly, it is the only Panzer III that can take the Schützen armored side skirts. These are a 10-point upgrade, and they give you the Schützen armored skirts special rule. These standoff thin armored plates protecting a tank's turret and hull sides were developed to act as additional armor against Russian anti-tank rifles. Later, they became more widely used and also helped protect a tank against shaped charges by detonating the warhead before it hit the main armor. If a German tank has Schützen, then anti-tank rifles and shaped charges such as bazookas and Piats never get the +1 penetration bonus for hitting the vehicle in the side. This is a nice little upgrade, and it does give you a marked durability against specific weapons, but the problem is it's kind of situational. If you're going into a tournament and you're not sure what you're likely to face, I'd probably leave the side skirts at home, because you may go into game after game where you're just getting shot at by anti-tank guns and you never face off against those shaped charges or anti-tank rifles, and basically you've just wasted 10 points. But if you're playing in a fun, local, friendly meta and you've got a pretty tight-knit group of bolt action players, and you know that a lot of the people that you play against prefer to use howitzers on their tanks and they kind of rely on those bazookas and Piat teams to do the heavy lifting, then it's actually a really sensible option and a good investment. Sadly, that does cover all of the Panzer IIIs that are geared towards tank duels and that are equipped with AT guns, but we still have 2 more variants to have a look at. The Model N completely goes against the grain and equips your Panzer III with a light howitzer. It's still a medium tank and it still has those 2 MMGs, but it is not going to be taking on enemy armor in this configuration. However, that doesn't mean that you should look down on the N or disregard it. Remember, it's all about having the right tool for the job and covering gaps in your list. If you've already got plenty of anti-tank, maybe you've got a Panzerschreck team in your army, then going for more AT might be a bit redundant. You might not be struggling with tanks at all. Instead, it could be veteran infantry dug into cover that are giving you a hard time. This is where the Panzer N starts to shine. It's very similar to the earlier variants of the Panzer IV, which I covered in my last unit review. If you haven't seen that one, I'll make sure to link it at the end of this episode. In fact, both tanks, the Panzer IIIN and the Panzer IVF, both cost the same amount, 175 points for regular and 210 points for veteran. Essentially, if you prefer the look of the Panzer III, but you want to have it with a howitzer, then you can do that. Or, the other way around, you might prefer the look of the Panzer IV. It's kind of just an aesthetic choice, and you get to go with the model of tank that you think looks the best. Now, technically, that covers all of the Panzer IIIs. But there's one more variant I want to have a look at. It's the Flammenpanzer Mark III. This is a late war variant of the Panzer III that is equipped with a turret-mounted flamethrower. Flamethrowers in bolt action are deadly. They are one of the few weapons in the game that can one-shot enemy units, and we're not just talking infantry. Unlike in 40k, where shooting a flamethrower at a tank merely warms the hull a little bit, in bolt action, they're a lot more realistic. No one wants to be trapped inside a metal box whilst it's on fire. They're essentially terror weapons, and they have good armor penetration, but most importantly, they force units that are hit by them to take a leadership test at a really serious penalty. So more often than not, if you shoot a flamethrower at enemy infantry or enemy tanks, even if you don't kill all that many, you're probably going to make the rest of the squad scatter and flee, or force the crew to bail out of their tank, effectively destroying it. To offset this incredible power, flamethrowers have a really, really short range. Infantry ones have only got a 6-inch range, and I believe vehicle flamethrowers have got a 12-inch range. To put that into perspective, medium machine guns have got a 36-inch range, and your light anti-tank gun on the Panzer III has got a 48, and the medium has got a 60-inch range. The point is, you're going to have to get your Flammenpanzer very much up close and personal with the enemy if you want to start hosing them down with the Flammen. Somewhat surprisingly, considering the potential power of this unit, it costs the same as the Panzer III with the light howitzer, the Model N. I think this is because it has a pretty bad special rule, which is volatile fuel tanks. This gives your opponent a +1 modifier when they're rolling to see the effects of the vehicle damage chart. So if your opponent gets a penetrating hit on your Flammenpanzer, on a 3+, it explodes and is destroyed. On a 2+, it sets on fire and has a very high chance of exploding and being destroyed. This also affects glancing hits, meaning that the Flammenpanzer is the only Panzer III that can be outright destroyed from a glancing hit and not just set on fire. Look, let me be honest with you. The Flammenpanzer is a bit of a meme. It's potentially incredibly powerful, but it's a specialized unit. Taking it will require a proper game plan. I would not recommend it for beginners unless you just want to have a bit of fun with it. The most important thing when considering this unit is having a delivery system. Charging up the field might work as a psychological weapon at first, but after a few games or against an experienced action player, they're going to be able to deal with it. If you can get this into the heart of an enemy force, you could win the game, but getting it there is going to be the tricky part. But that covers the last Panzer III we're going to have a look at today. Let's move on to the final thoughts and everyone's favourite part, the score out of 10. Overall, I just love the Panzer III. It is one of my favourite tanks to field in my German army. I actually started off being a Panzer IV fanboy, but after using the Panzer III in a few games, it's now my go-to tank. It's cheaper than the Panzer IV and it comes with more than enough firepower to get the job done. Its bigger strength is the number of variants. There is a Panzer III for every player and one for every game plan. However, it does have a few disadvantages. Firstly, because there is so much choice and so many different options, it can be a little overwhelming for new players. There's an old saying, the agony of choice. And if you're a beginner to bolt action, you might struggle to know which variant is the best one for your army. Also, as with the Panzer IV, strictly speaking, the Panzer III isn't meta. Most competitive bolt action lists focus on very light armor, spamming as many machine guns as possible. Things like the Hargo or the Panzer I. These cheap machine gun caddies are brilliant for bullying enemy infantry, and if they die, you really don't mind because it was such a low points investment. However, that is for proper competitive play, and for most normal games of bolt action, you'll find the Panzer III is more than up to the task. In fact, the only real disadvantage that the Panzer III will have, and the only thing you might struggle with in your friendly games of bolt action, will be when you encounter heavy armor. That's when the medium AT gun is going to start struggling a little bit, and you may find that you need the extra punch of something like a Panzer IV. Taking all of this into account, I am going to give the Panzer III a fantastic score of 9 out of 10. Something I don't hand out lightly, making it the highest rated vehicle that we've looked at to date. But all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed today's video, make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. And if you want to see more bolt action content and go the extra mile and support the channel, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. It's thanks to the generous support of the channel members and patrons that I'm able to cover a variety of game systems, including bolt action. One of the biggest perks you get for being a supporter is you gain access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community of almost 1,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord, and whilst it is principally focused on 40k, we do have a small yet growing and very mighty bolt action community. And I just want to say a big thank you to the latest channel members, Brandon F, Dagnalls, Alfarius, M1 and RCI. I also want to do a shout out to the Patreons, so a massive thank you to Simon Dolding, Anthony, Iron Nerd and Jonathan Jacobson. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bonbon Vert, Mark Panconi, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Diesel Fox, August Varney, and Absolute Rubbish. Thank you guys, your generous support makes a huge difference. I hope everyone enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.